Good evening, everyone, and thank you. We are, this is the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting for the 19th of January. And we're just going to go around and say who we are. I'm Councillor Pippa Connor, and I'm the Vice Chair on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I chair the budget part of the scrutiny. Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt White. I'm a councillor for Tottenham Central and I chair the Housing, Planning and Development Scrutiny Panel.
Hi, I'm Councillor Makbule Guinness. I represent a South Tottenham ward. I'm also the chair of Children and Young People's Panel.
Tim Mpofu, Head of Pensions and Treasury here at Haringey.
Francis Properly, Head of Finance.
Sarah Williams, Cabinet Member for Finance and Local Investment.
John Waller, Director of Finance.
Josephine Lycett, Assistant Director of Finance.
Councillor John Bevan, Northumberland Park, Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, but as it is a budget meeting, it is chaired by the Opposition Vice Chair.
My name is Philip Slaughter. I'm the Scrutiny Officer for the committee.
So I've got members who are on the in the call today. So I've got Councillor Sappho Simmons. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Michelle Simmons-Sappho, Councillor Simmons-Sappho. I am the chair of the Environment, Safety and Community Panel, and I'm also the Seven Sisters Ward Councillor. Please forgive the background noise. I've got children.
Thank you. So Yvonne?
I'm Yvonne Denny. I'm the representative for the London Diocese Board.
Thank you, Lords.
Hello, I'm Lourdes Keever and I'm the co-opted member representing the Diocese of Westminster.
We've got a new co-optee that we're welcoming tonight. Hello, Vanessa. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Vanessa Holt. I'm parent governor.
Great, thank you very much. And obviously, if you want to raise any questions, please put your hand up if you can on your screen, and Philip will indicate that you'd like to ask a question. So please just do so. Thank you. So we're going on to the section about filming at meetings. There should be a bit in front of in your pack that says this meeting is being filmed for recorded by the council for live or subsequent broadcast. And if you are on the meeting, you are agreeing to be filmed and recorded. Moving on to item number 2, apologies for absence.
So we've not had any apologies for absence, Chair.
Any urgent business?
I believe we're going to amend the order of the agenda this evening. So the published agenda has cabinet member questions under agenda item 8, and the MTFS scrutiny of the draft budget and 5-year MTFS is item 9. I believe the proposal is to swap those around, so we'll take the budget item first, followed by cabinet member questions. The only other thing to flag up is that on the published agenda, there were children's panel minutes marked to follow. They will have to be withdrawn and brought to the subsequent meeting.
Thank you for that. Any declarations of interest from anyone? No. Okay. Any deputations? No.
No deputation.
Okay. Minutes of the scrutiny panel meeting. So we've got the 3 other panel minutes. The chair's happy to agree the minutes from their panel meetings.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going straight on to the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. That's pages 35 to 60 in the main pack. We've got Tim here today, Head of Pensions and Treasury, come to sort of give that introduction, and then we'll take questions from the panel. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Mpofu. I'm the Head of Pensions and Treasury, and I will be introducing this item, which is the draft Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2023-2024. So just to mention to members, like this report is based on the December budget figures. So work is currently underway to finalize those figures, but we don't anticipate that they'll have a large impact on the numbers included in this report. So the report is for the recommendation is for the report to be scrutinized prior to it being presented to the corporate committee, which is happening in a couple of weeks' time. In terms of the report itself, it is a requirement of the SIP for code for the council to actually agree a treasury strategy statement at the beginning of each year. How it works at Haringey is it tends to come to this scrutiny committee first for members to ask questions. It then goes on to the corporate committee, which has the responsibility to agree any of the changes to the treasury management statement. It then goes to full council, which finally approves it. So this is an initial stage in what is probably a bit of a longer process. So just a few things really to highlight from the report itself, which I'm sure we'll go in more detail later. The first thing really is the economic environment, which is contained in section 3 of the report that we find ourselves in. So over the last few months, we've seen that there's been high sustained inflation. The Bank of England, as a result, has continued to increase its interest rates, which effectively means that the cost of borrowing on any new borrowing for the council has increased. But on the other side as well, the amount of money that we can get from our treasury investments in terms of the deposits we make with other institutions has also increased. So those counter forces are sort of counteracting each other. And for the purpose of setting this treasury strategy, we have assumed, and this is in line with the budget, that any new borrowing we will make, and it says in the papers 2.5%. So any new investments we will place with institution, it says 2.5%, but we've actually revised that based on the latest Bank of England rate rise. So that's likely to be 3%. And any new long-term borrowing will be at a rate of 4.5%. And again, that's based on the forecast that we've received from the Treasury advisors, Alan Close. So this is just to highlight to members that this is a big sort of change compared to where we've been before, but it is the economic environment that we do find ourselves in at this moment in time. So essentially, the rest of the report just goes through the main areas of treasury management. And effectively, treasury management is responsible for managing the council's cash flows. So there are stuff in this section that looks at how those cash flows will be managed and sets limits on us as officers in terms of how we implement that. It also looks at the borrowing activity and sets our strategies to how we plan to implement that borrowing activity. So that area is contained in section 4 of the report. In section 5, it looks at the investments. So anytime we have excess cash, we have to invest it or deposit it with other institutions. There is a framework of how those decisions are made, primarily the focus being on security first, whether we can get our money out, liquidity, whether we can get out when we need it, and finally the yield, which will be the interest return. That's kind of the last element that we look for when making those decisions. So that again is set out in section 5. And then finally, just to highlight to members that section 7 talks about the treasury management prudential indicators. And effectively, these are limits that we must comply in. It looks at how we manage our risk. So some of the stuff that's included in there is our refinancing risk. So that looks at the different loans that we have and whether they are all not maturing at the same time, because that obviously means if interest rates are higher, there might be a risk of us refinancing at a higher rate. But it also looks at things like how we control credit risk with our counterparties and how we control the liquidity risk for the authority. So with that being said, those are the opening remarks on the paper, and I'm happy to sort of open that up for questions.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was really helpful just to sort of sum it up for us in the way that you just did. I'm going to look to the panel for any questions. Whilst I'm doing that, I'm going to start with one that's sort of maybe slightly cheeky one, but you said this goes to the corporate committee. So the corporate, when this was looked at last year, the corporate committee, obviously, we came through us, went to corporate committee before full council. Did the corporate committee make any sort of recommendations or any changes, or did they suggest any sort of, did they indicate any risk that you think, okay, that was, we hadn't had that, and then they, that was a change. So was there anything that sort of changed going through that process before it came to full council last year?
Off the top of my head, I'm not completely sure, but I don't remember the document changing in a meaningful way. I mean, how these documents are structured, there is certain information we need to include, and some of the assumptions are quite broad. So if members were to make any suggestions to change, it might not necessarily have a meaningful impact into how the council actually undertakes its treasury management activities. So I do know that the comments that were made in this committee were passed on to the consideration, and I think in conversation they could have probably been considered, but I don't remember any meaningful change.
I just thought I'd ask because I never really sort of heard back, you know, you sort of there's bits in that you don't quite hear back in the cycle, isn't there? So I was just wondering that anything that once if we put anything forward from today, if we do get any, it would be nice to sort of get that feedback just the committee, just out of interest really, to see if anything after those conversations are had. So that was the opening question that I had. I'm going to look round. I've got Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, looking at the table in 3.1 on page 41 of the pack, which is about the capital financing requirement of the council, it looks like we're going to be borrowing significantly more as a council year after year. We're going to be holding more debts. Obviously, part of that is to do with the HRA and the very ambitious house building programme that the council has got. But unless I'm misunderstanding the figures on the page, it seems that around about half, or maybe even slightly more than half of that, is from the general fund. So why is borrowing against a general fund going up? What are the projects that are increasing the level of borrowing on the general fund, if I'm understanding the figures that I'm looking at correctly? Thanks.
Yes, so I'm happy to pass that on to John in terms of the actual projects that are increasing that. But yes, the general fund also has an ambitious capital program.
Thank you. So the real explanation for why we have that increase in the general fund related borrowing is better found in the MTFS report rather than this one. So this one deals with the implications of it to the Treasury strategy rather than explaining all the shifts in the capital program. So when we get on to the next item, we will then have a chance to explore the general fund capital program. But the primary drivers within it, in terms of where the big money are going, is in the various regeneration schemes that the authority is preparing for in its financial framework, whilst recognising, as with any item being included within the capital programme, that does not represent the decision to proceed. The decision to proceed will only be taken as and when that scheme is worked up and is presented to members for decision. And the vast majority of such schemes are on a self-financing basis because we expect to get some form of support to offset it. So that accounts for a lot of it. We have substantial growth in the schools capital programme, which is an obligation upon the local authority due to the vagaries of the schools funding system, you know, that the schools get a grant for their running costs, but we have to provide the capital framework for that. There's also a lot of expenditure forecast to be required for the main infrastructure of the borough, roads and pavements, parks, bridges, things that actually the assessment is that they're unavoidable given the condition of those assets, both now and the deterioration. And then there is another major head, which is in regard of the civic centre development across the road, and also some digital transformation type capital spend that we've provided for as well. And when you add all of those up, that is what's driving that quite marked increase in our borrowing position. And members, you know, when you're determining whether, you know, that is the right thing to do, you have to look at the composition and really get your head around, you know, those individual parts. Thank you.
Thanks for that, John. And could I just follow up? So the regeneration projects that you've mentioned, so Selby Centre, Wars Corner, Gawley Triangle. These would be these. My understanding, am I correct, in quite a large proportion of that will actually be housing, but it's going currently against the general fund and will eventually be transferred to the HRA when it becomes housing. Is that right?
That is correct. So we tend to provide in the capital programme for the whole development scheme, and then there is a transference of that into the HRA, and that is assumed within the HRA business plan as well.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question that's going to follow on from Councillor White's question. So we talked about the large amount of borrowing. So I think in the Treasury Management Strategy, again at that table at 3.1, there's new borrowing to be raised. Now, we were having a look earlier, the total capital financing requirement in this year for the General Fund and the HRA is 972 million, roughly, on the sort of third thing down. The new borrowing to be raised by 2028, which would include obviously the General Fund and the HRA, is 1.8 billion. So I suppose the question is, we've gone from a position where we had a reasonable level of borrowing, and the interest rates were low by chance, and really, unfortunately, and nothing that we could have predicted, the interest rates are now going up. And if we are about to start as a council on an area of a reasonable amount of spend over the next 5 years, with those interest rates may needing to be fixed potentially at a higher rate than we would have been able to do a couple of years ago, what risk do you think that is to us as a council?
Yeah, no. Okay, so I think I'll go first, but then I'll let John come in. So I think there is obviously that risk that the cost of borrowing is going to be high, and that is part of why when we're doing the budget we set that the interest rate forecast of what we think over the MTFS is going to cost us to borrow. So when you're doing the assumption of the cost of borrowing, we do assume that over time, obviously there are fluctuations ups and down, but the 4.5 is sort of like a central figure based on the assumptions that have been provided to us by Alan Close, and also some of the calculations that we have done. So I think one of the risks is obviously the cost of borrowing goes up, but when a lot of these schemes are being approved or are being sort of checked, there is a requirement that they either, if they're self-financing, there will be a requirement that there will be self-financing. So there is other revenue lines, which I'm sure John can probably speak to more in greater detail. Just the final point is on the internal borrowing, which I think we did discuss earlier, is we don't necessarily finance all of that immediately. We do look at different opportunities, and what you can see sometimes in the markets is how they move. They can dip up and down. So if we're looking at the graph of PWB borrowing, sometimes it goes way below the 4.5 budget line, where we take an opportunity to take additional borrowing. So from a treasury perspective, that would be more how we're managing it against that forecast. But from the schemes, it'll be a bit of a different in terms of how they get actually approved into the capital program.
Thank you. John, did you want to add?
Yeah, thanks. I won't say too much more. Tim's given a good description of how that's accommodated within our borrowing strategy, which is something we spend a lot of time and attention on. The other side of the question is what it means to our revenue account and the affordability of that. I think that the first point I would make, councillors, is probably one I made a moment ago, that making provision in the programme is to establish a framework which can make these things possible at a later point if members have a business case that proves that that is affordable. And if you look at the housing schemes, we look at the cost of the schemes as they come through in terms of the assumptions within the business case and what the unit costs and all that goes with that for those housing schemes. And a decision is made on a scheme by scheme basis, and that will be predicated upon the new rates of interest that Tim has described. So we make sure that all of those business cases are using the interest rates that we expect to be the case in the future years. So we've got that alignment there. And you know, the same will be true on the regen schemes when we are bringing those through to members. They will have significant costs, as been described. They will have income streams, whether they be from contributions from the housing revenue account or from the GLA or from whatever it will be. And again, we're using the latest interest costs in those to make sure we're testing affordability. But at the end of the day, it is a statement of fact that, you know, notwithstanding all of that, the fact that interest rates have gone up is one of the reasons that we are financially challenged. You know, if we didn't do any more schemes from here on in, we still have existing debt coming to be refreshed because it's come to term, and the rates that we're having to replace those with are on higher rates. And you know, there is a fair turnover because we try to make sure that debt doesn't all come to an end at the same time in 1 year, that we try to have a profile on that. So it is a financial pressure on us, and it's something that hopefully we clearly recognise in the budget report. Yeah, it's one of many, but you know, it is a substantial one.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Bevan.
So this 2722, so there's not an upper limit or some formula that the government says you've borrowed enough, you can't do any more. Providing every case stacks up as a business case, you can actually go on borrowing for every single business case, like that council, I think you said Thurrock did. Was it Thurrock? But then their business cases all went wrong. Was it that council, Tim, you said? So there's not a legal limit anywhere in the system. It's all based on the business case.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And it does seem peculiar, doesn't it, that there's no formula for determining the maximum that a council can borrow. Instead of that, we all have to comply with the Prudential Code, which articulates the sort of tests that we have to do to evidence that we can borrow it. And that's sort of, I suppose there's two primary component parts to that. The formal one is in the work that this Treasury strategy sets out, which looks at the total financial consequences of existing and new borrowing, which come in line, which are driven by any capital expenditure proposals we have, translates that into what the future debt charges will be for next and future years. We then have to take that into our revenue planning equation, both for the general fund and the HRA, and that is the key test. Can we afford, within the general fund's income streams, council tax grants, whatever it might be, to be able to sustain that level of debt both now and into the future, and the same for housing revenue account. So that's the acid test, really, of the affordability. And that gets to the heart of the prudential sort of judgment that must be taken. And it's a really significant part of our financial strategy. And then once we've done that, if members have accepted that and said, yes, that's the capital programme, then that's the borrowing strategy, that's the budget. But all the business cases that we do thereafter are our subsequent checks to make sure that it plays out in the way that we anticipated when we set the budget.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just going to sort of clarify. So what we're saying as a council is that we were going to have to re-provision the debt anyway, or there'll be debt coming up at the moment that needs to be proper work. Yeah, refinance. Thank you. All finance officers. Refinance at the moment, and the risk is at the moment we've got those higher interest rates. Do we know how much debt we've currently got coming up in the next 6 months that we would need to refinance in this with potentially higher interest rates?
So yes, that is a technical. I'll say the answer is yes, but I don't have it necessarily on hand. I would say generally, when we did the last attended corporate committee, it was below 15% that we expect to refinance over the foreseeable future. But it's also bearing in mind that in the context of where rates are, a lot of the debt that's already in the portfolio, even though it's, it's quite low, some of those, there are a number of opportunities where there can be market fluctuations and we can refinance at lower rates than what we've budgeted for. So I think in the context of the whole sort of 700 and something million that we talked about earlier, above probably less than 15% of that would be due in any 1 year. And some of those maturities are obviously spread over the course of several years.
Thank you, Tim. John?
Just to add to that, it is fact that in Tim's treasury model, it plans out those and when they're going to happen, and it models in the impact of replacing the existing debt cost with the new debt cost. It's just neither of us can remember quite what that number is at the moment. Thank you.
That's absolutely fine for you to come back with that. I think it was just really to give us an indication, because obviously the higher rates that we have to refinance that debt at, the higher interest rates, the more impact it'll have on our revenue account for the borrowing. So it was just really to get an understanding from you if that's an area of concern that you've particularly got at the moment.
No, I'd say it's a particular area of concern, but we do provide that information to the corporate committee on a quarterly basis. So yeah, I'm happy to share that when we prepare that information for the next committee.
Any other questions? We were talking about reserves earlier, Tim. Can you just give us a succinct understanding of, I know it was quite hard for us to sort of get our heads around it, but it's really just an understanding for us as a council, how much we hold in reserves in order to mitigate some of this debt, or offsets probably, I think I'm looking for the right terms here, offset, you can correct me here, offset this debt. So if you've got any sort of figures you could share with us, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think just to clarify for those who are not in the training earlier, I think there was a mention around internal borrowing and how that sort of features in the council's program. So one of the key things that does go into that is the reserves in terms of the cash that we already have on hand or any other grants that we might receive ahead of spend. But a key factor that drives that internal borrowing number is also on the delivery of the capital program. So in this assumption, we assume that the capital program will be delivered 80%, I think we assume in the forecast we put in, but in reality, there tends to be delays and the slippages, and that feeds into that internal borrowing figure. All it means is we have a requirement where we need to borrow, but we don't have an urgent need to do so. And that actually provides us with a bit of flexibility in terms of our refinancing, to your earlier question, where we can see in contact with, Alan Close, that rates have dropped dramatically. We can be confident to sort of action those borrowing decisions. But where perhaps it seems the rates are a bit higher, we can sort of wait and the internal borrowing would increase slightly. So it's sort of a means of us managing our refinancing risk. But yes, in terms of the actual reserve number, I think that's probably one for maybe for John again.
Thanks. So as Tim said, the cash available to part offset borrowing costs comes from a variety of different places, not all of which are what we would recognise as being the usable reserves, but the usable reserve position of the authority as at 31st of March 22 for the general fund was 120 million in total, which includes the general fund balance and all of the earmarked reserves that go with that. So that was the position at the start of the current financial year.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to check that we've got no other questions coming. So I'm just checking to the co-optees if you've got any questions. Anything, Lord, Yvonne or Vanessa? And Councillor Simmons-Sappho? Oh, sorry, who was that? Who said yes?
No.
No? Okay, just checking. No? Okay, just don't want to make sure I miss anything out. Okay, so a final question then would be, just given the circumstances of all the risks that we know around the budget, around the interest rates, around, the risk due to the war in Ukraine and other pressures that are coming into the country at the moment, is this a is this the best time? Because it's a point where we are substantially borrowing compared to what has happened in the last 10 years. So the rate of borrowing is increasing quite substantially. Given all the risks that we've brought up today, is this a good time, or is there a point where we think as the council, okay, there are substantive risks, do we hold back for 6 months and see how the land lies, or is it something that actually that won't make any difference? I mean, we're lay people asking the finance experts here, so it's really just to sort of get that sort of risk from our perspective as to whether this is the best time to be undertaking quite a substantive sort of level of borrowing.
Thanks. Very good question. I think that the response to that must be that sort of point of view, that challenge, needs to be brought to bear each time we have a decision-making point wherein the authority is deciding whether or not to proceed with capital investment. You will see from my brief summary of a couple of minutes ago about where the capital spend goes, that much of it is actually difficult to defer because of the circumstances that are behind it. You know, if you've got roads that have become unfit for purpose, or a school, or health and safety issues in the park, or whatever it might be. So, you know, that would be part of the decision making then. And again, if you look at with housing schemes, the authority is a beneficiary of a substantial grant regime from the GLA. It's negotiated and is part of two major packages now of grant, and they are locked in with a delivery period. So that again needs to be part of any phasing decision, because those grants are in effect the GLA discharging distributions from government, and they're not elastic in when they can be delivered. There are fixed windows, so all those factors have to be taken into account.
Okay, no further questions. Councillor Darkides. Councillor Darkides, can you just pop your mic on? Thank you.
This version of the report obviously will go to the corporate committee in about 10 days' time, with whatever comments you have as well from here. And I'll just say, if anybody wanted to get more information or to ask more questions, you heard the officer talking about Arlene Close, our advisors, who just tell us all about what the future would be. They would be there as well answering questions. So if you do want to follow it up, to be a bit more. And I think it would be helpful even online, somebody just to follow up what's happening there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That'll be taken up. Thank you. And I've got Yvonne. I think your hand's up. Did you want to come in with a question just before we finish?
I would just like to ask, I don't know whether it's relevant for this, but the £25 million that belongs to the Bridge and Newell Trust now, that was earmarked for housing down on the old Ward's Corner. Will this will this evolve into that? Because that money was earmarked for housing for that particular site. And nobody seems to be saying anything about it, but I do know that that's the amount of money that is in the bank, and it's held in an account on its own in the council.
I think you've asked something with quite a level of detail there, Yvonne. So I'm going to look to officers. If they can't give a response, then we'll take a written response if they've not got the detail to hand.
Okay.
No, I'm afraid, Chair, that there's going to be questions related to particular areas where just haven't got all of that. That would be a question that you would probably be well put in the particular panel meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Darkides.
Sorry, I think the £2.5 million Yvonne that you're talking about, which was the contribution towards the whole project, not just housing, had been paid to them. It had been paid, and then afterwards, when we made now the deal about for the developer disengaging, I'm not sure exactly whether they have repaid some of it or will have repaid it, but it has been taken all into account within the overall sums that we've got at the moment. But it had been paid at 1.5 million, one pay and a second one. You were on the board at the time, Yvonne. You remember that's it was paid as an advance at the time. I don't think there will be anything that we will be expecting to come from that one anymore. But the council now will play the lead role on the new development, and there, whatever housing or other developments will happen will be funded properly. And you are working on it in detail, in quite a lot of detail, the various possibilities there. But there isn't in a bank £2.5 million somewhere. That doesn't exist.
Yes, it does. It sits in an account of its own. I've already been in through this. I haven't let it go since the day it started. Granger paid that money in for that project to happen. It didn't. So therefore, the money is still in that account in the council. I've been told that, so I know it's there. And I'm still part of the bridge, and I'm still fighting to make sure that if that money isn't spent on housing in the South Tottenham area, then it needs to be just returned to the Bridge Renewal Trust.
So Yvonne, I've heard
Thank
very
you.
clearly. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I've heard very clearly your sort of question to the officers tonight. What we'll do as the committee is we'll ask them to come back with a response, because obviously that's a level of detail that we wouldn't expect them to have tonight, but they'll go in and look into this for us and come back to you with a response. Is that okay?
That's lovely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. To close down this item on the Treasury Management Strategy, I'd just like to say thank Tim for coming in and going through it with us, and John to speak to it. As a committee, we've heard the issues that surround it. We've noted the concerns around the interest rates and all the other risks that have been raised this evening, and I think we'll just leave it at that point there. But thank you very much. So thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Chair.
We're going to now, as Philip said earlier, amend the running order. So we're going to go straight into the scrutiny of the 2023-24 draft budget and the 5-year medium-term financial strategy. That's pages 61 to 174. It's on the supplementary pack, if you've got that to hand. So that was agenda item 9 in the pack. It's now going to go to 8. So what we're going to do for everyone, just to be really clear, is that we're going to go through each of the panels has already made the recommendations. It's come back. They've maybe asked for further information. So that further information is now being provided in the pack. We as a committee will go through each of the areas panel by panel. And then we'll go through and make the final recommendations as we go through. But I'm going to start with John, who's going to open this item up and give us a little bit of a sort of overview and any other financial information that's come since we've last been scrutinising it. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Always pleased to come here this time of year to talk to ONS about the way the financial position of the authority looks like it's shaping up for future years. I will be brief, not least which because I know that you in your panels have engaged thoroughly with officers before, and you've obviously delved down because that's apparent from all the work you've done and the action points that you've come up. So you have the paper that went to the December cabinet meeting, which, as ever, we intend to be a comprehensive report on all the financial aspects facing the authority, both revenue and capital, housing revenue account, general fund, and also the school's funding position. Like all the recent years that I've been here, it's apparent, isn't it, that this again is set in a very challenging climate for this local authority, which is set in a very challenging climate for the UK and indeed the world more generally financially. This isn't going to start next year. It's been with us for some time now. You keep abreast of the monitoring reports, so you know how we're doing in real time. And you'll know that for 22-23, the year we're currently in, when last reported on Q2 that the overspend position for the general fund was running somewhere in the region of 16 million. And we'll be doing an update on that for Q3. So that was Q2. Q3 will come through. Is it December? Not December, March. Sorry, March. I'm not going to sort of give you any precise numbers now, but I can say, you know, that there hasn't been an amazing turnaround on that. You know, those estimates, that sort of degree of challenge is definitely holding up. I'd like to say otherwise, but you know, you've read Q2, you read Q1, you've spoken to Beverly and Anne, you know why that is, because predominantly it's in the care services areas. So the report that you've got for next and future years was our best estimates in advance of the local government provisional financial settlement, because that's they always like to give us a nice Christmas present, and I think that came out about 19th of December. So that all local authorities have something to, you know, process over the Christmas break. And I will say a couple of words because I know you wanted to get some reflections on what that seems to be saying. So I'll come on to that in a moment. But so you've got the paper. All of the approaches taken there are obviously prepared in line with the administration steer and its policy position. The work's taken many months to get to that point, to get to all of the many measures that are described in it. Takes, you know, the best. It feels like we do this permanently, really. I think everyone around the table probably, you know, feel like that. And literally, as soon as we finish this budget, we will start next year's, and we will start with what it takes for that. So that's how hard it is for local authorities to get these things over the line. So it's intended to convey that a realistic and hard-nosed approach has been taken to it. We really do try not to, you know, flog things when nothing good is going to come from them. We set out our change agenda. We can't deliver all of it, so you will see that some of the previous assumptions are written out. But actually, I would suggest to you, in light of the size of the savings programme that we've got for this year, the amount that's not going to be achieved at all is probably not an unsurprising proportion, because some of what we're not achieved yet, we do expect to achieve in next and the years after that. So it's not that they're not dead in the water, but some of it, you will see in some of the areas we've had to say, no, that's not going to work as expressed, particularly in adults, but they have then really engaged with it and have put forward a whole raft of differently thought through approaches on much the same service areas, but reflecting how we now think we can proceed. So if you look at this budget in total as of December, there are substantial additional investments included within it, nearly 15 million, 2/3 of which at least I think is in care services. And there is a refresh savings programme within it, and if you take out the ones we've put a line through and take account of the ones we've added, there's an additional net savings proposals here of 9.8 million, just short of 10 million. One of the characteristics of last year's budget was that there was no new savings contained, and you'll remember that because you had this conversation here. And there was a very clear reason for that the organisation was in its second year of the COVID response period. It was up to its eyeballs in it. It already had a massive savings programme in place, and we were neither in the place to identify further real deliverable measures or deliver them. And so that was a conscious strategy, and that required the application of a reserve that we'd already put aside to in effect smooth the financial challenge to the authority over the current year and next year. So that was a pre-planned and thought through strategy. So this is different because it now contains a real refresh on the savings program and new proposals in it, because you know, the organisation is now in a different place, and that's considered, you know, a reasonable and the right thing to do. You will have read in it that it didn't balance as a draft budget at the time it was put to cabinet. It didn't balance, had a gap of some £3 million. But it was clear that we hadn't had the local government finance settlement at that point, and that contained some big numbers. So it made sense to sort of, in effect, take a pause at that time and then see what that would facilitate. So there was an articulated strategy on that. So I'll say a couple of words then about what that has actually included for local authorities and what it means to us. And clearly, I won't be giving you all the detail of quite how it manifests itself into the final budget, because that's still for the administration to, you know, to present itself in the normal timeline when the report comes out. But you'll know if you're following the announcements, either in the trade press, telly, or the media, that the government talked about that there were substantial increases in the core spending power for local authorities in general. And core spending power is a measure which includes just about all the major income streams to the general fund. So it's the core grants that we get, the revenue support grants, the locally retained business rates. Now, see, for some years we've been doing that, new homes bonus, and also the social care grants. But importantly, it also includes council tax. So when they announced that they were estimating that the core spending power would go up nationally by 9.2%, and on their figures for us at 9.8%, that was assuming that local authorities such as ourselves would maximise the full discretion to put up council tax by the thresholds that they were now releasing. We didn't have them before. So there were two parts to that permission. There's the main council tax increase, which can go up to 2.99% before you have a referendum, a figure that you'll be familiar with. It has applied in recent years. And they've also made possible again the adult social care precept, which is a further form of increase up to 2%. Again for next year. So in total, local authorities such as ourselves can put council tax up by 4.99%. And it's for authorities to decide their stance on it. When we did the December draft budget, we'd used 2.99% or 3%. So that's about 2% more than we'd assumed at the time we'd done the draft budget, because that announcement hadn't been made. So that's an important part of it. But you can see what a substantive role council tax plays in the funding of local authorities. That they've said, you know, nationally it's 9.2%, but they're expecting nationally the council tax to go up by 5%, and that's included in 9.2. So council tax is really a serious component part for all local authorities' income. So if I just quickly summarise what was a very complex set of announcements. In respect of the sort of main funding elements for the authority, if you wrap up together all the changes they made on business rates changes, revenue support grant, non-social care grants, wrap all that up into a bundle, that's basically come out pretty much as we anticipated in the December report very much. I think it might be about £500,000 lower than we anticipated, but nearly there. So our estimates were pretty good on that. The area in which the grants announcements are higher than we'd assumed were on social care. You'll probably be expecting this because you'll be reading the press. So on social care, the grants in total were in excess of 10 million more than we'd budgeted as a grant income. But about 3.3 million of that are specific grants that they have named. There's a discharge grant and there's a sustainability grant, both in the adult sector, which the authority will passport through to those areas. And then there's about 6.5 million of a social care grant, which can be used for adults and children. Now, what we are doing at the moment is processing that and see, because obviously we anticipate a step up in grant in the December report. So we're just going through the maths and making sure we understand how much of that 6.5 million has already been anticipated and how much it might be extra to what we had put into the budget. And then obviously the administration will be deciding about how that's presented in the February report. So the way I've summarised it in comments to members after the settlement announcement was that the headline figures look good, it seems positive, but actually it's in no way a game changer. Even with those levels of social care grant announcements I've just quoted, they don't match the degree of expenditure increases that we are forecasting we need to make on the social care areas. So they go some of the way, but not all of the way. And obviously, we've got a lot of challenges in the current year's budget we need to rectify. And looking forward, I don't think any of us can be confident that the announcements that they've made for year 2 as well, because they've given sort of 2 years indications next year and the year after. I don't think we can be confident that they are going to be dealing with all the pressures that we've got in those years either. So the consequences of those grant announcements will be reflected in the February report. And obviously, as you'd expect, the February report will be putting forward a balanced budget for members' consideration, dealing with the 3.5 million that was recognised in the last one. I'll be quick on the other one. So on the housing revenue account, the report deals with that and all of the implications of the anticipated really substantial expenditure on the existing stock and the new programme. Within it, there are recommendations for a new form of rent to be applied in limited circumstances. It's modelled on a 7% rent increase, which was announced by the government as being the sort of figure that local authorities might use. But it's not until the February report that the council will make any decision on that. And the December report recognised that the HRA we still had some work to do on that before we came to the final position in February, and that's been addressed at the moment. With regard to the DSG and the schools funding, the safety valve position is described in that paper of December, and probably all I would say on that note is that that dialogue with the government about arriving at a deal is progressing as well as we could expect, and we'll be formally updating members, I'm sure, in the February paper. And then there's the capital, extensive reporting on the capital as well, which is what drives some of the implications that Tim has spoken to earlier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So any quick questions on anything that John has raised around the substantive budget before we move on to the panel's recommendations? Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, so just to clarify for me, it looks as if you're saying that as the weeks go by, these figures will change because you're still working out some of the recent announcements. So at the present time, overall, the two budgets, the HRA and the General Fund, what is the estimated deficit for the coming financial year, and how much is being borrowed from reserves to offset that deficit? That's the first question. The second question is, are there any more government announcements still awaited as any future funding? And also the levelling up announcement that came out yesterday, have we benefited from any levelling up funding?
Just because it's a good news story, John, I thought I'd come in. Yeah, we've been awarded 20 million for the first phase of the Selby project. So, very good news.
That's capital, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Chair, I'll pick up on your two. With regard to the question about deficit and reserves, the budget for next year, the budget for next year as presented to December assumed that we would use 5.5 million of a reserve that was specifically created 2 years ago for that purpose. So that's the assumption within the December report. I can advise that members will receive a balanced budget which will not have a deficit in February, because that's the only basis in which the authority can proceed, because that then forms the essence of the report that goes on to council, and that needs to be a balanced budget. The paper in February will describe whether or not there has been any changes in the application of reserves. The other question you asked was about, have we got all the grant announcements? And I was just looking at Frances, who's always, really well up on these things, and she's reminded me that the one major grant announcement that we haven't yet received is public health, and it is always late. It is always late. So we're still waiting on that one. And that's a major grant. It's about 20 odd million, isn't it? Yeah.
John? Okay, no follow-up on that. So I was just going to then ask on Councillor Bevan's question about further money. So hypothetically, because my understanding is that you're saying about the council tax that obviously that decision comes out in February. That's yet to come. But say we did raise the council tax in the social precept section. How much money would you make by increasing that section? So would we make an extra 5 million on council tax? What sort of figures are we sort of looking at if we raise the money? Oh, of Councillor Williams, yeah.
If you want this, so we a sort of a rough rule of thumb is each percent is just over £1 million on council tax. Yeah.
Thank you. So that's really helpful. So so potentially maybe 2 million if that was raised, but you were saying that we potentially have, and though you were really clear that you don't know if it is completely new money because it all has to go through your books first, but that potentially we have £6.5 million extra and in the social care grant that is part of that £10 million that has just been allocated. Am I correct in thinking that? And if we do, is that and that 6.5 million, some of that hopefully is new money that comes to us. Would that provide a buffer? Because I know you've had to put extra money into adults and children's in order to ensure that you've increased their base budget. So is that money potentially going to be used for increasing their base budget as you've done in the past, or is this for sort of something that may be allocated for new or against the council tax? Does that make sense?
Thanks. So members should not assume, as you've said, as you've pointed out, that there's a direct correlation between that figure I gave you about how much the social care grant was and how much extra there could be in the social care budgets. Because as I said before, we've already made some assumptions about grant levels, and this is a confirmation about what's going to be there. So we're looking at that. And we're also looking at, what we've already funded and comparing that with what might be assumed by these additional grant levels. So we will be clear in the report about how that has been managed, but that, as you would expect, the authority is looking to utilise. We'll be utilising those additional grant streams on the expected services. So we will spell out how that's washed through in the final report.
Thank you. So we'll wait and see for February. Thank you. Okay, so any further questions on the main parts of the budget that John's just spoken to us, or should we go straight into the panels? Right, we'll move straight into the panel's recommendations. Oh, sorry, Lords, apologies. Anyone else on camera other than Lords, just to indicate now? Yvonne, have you got your hand up as well, or is that a legacy hand?
Sorry, Pippa, it's a legacy hand.
No problem at all. So Lords, over to you.
The safety valve was mentioned, and initially when it was first mentioned at one or two meetings, we were certainly given the impression that we would possibly be getting a positive decision from the DfE by the end of December. We're now coming up to nearly sort of, the end of January, and it still seems as if Haringey hasn't been given a positive sort of, answer. I mean, why is this? I mean, what else is the DfE demanding of Haringey with regards to our acceptance onto this programme? Because I'm very, very interested and very worried, of course, about the concerns of this programme. But it's interesting, that no definite decision has been given.
Okay, thank you, Lords. I'll look to John. Are you? Oh, sorry, Councillor Williams.
That's okay. So thanks for the question, Lords. It's something that we're all very keen to get firmed up. It is our understanding that the Secretary of State is looking positively at our case, but that's all we know for now, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Lords, because that is an area of concern I know you've raised before. Okay, so we're going to go straight on now to the budget scrutiny recommendations that were made in panel. They're now coming to OSC for sort of our final comments and ratifications. In these, there is some new information that's within some of the recommendations. So we'll go straight over. We've got Housing Planning and Development Scrutiny Panel. We're going to go straight over to Councillor Matt White to talk through his individual proposals. And if any members have got any questions, please raise them as we go through the proposals. Otherwise, we'll go for the recommendations.
Great, thanks, Chair. So my panel scrutinises housing management, house building, regeneration, planning, and stuff like that, basically. So in the budget relating to those areas, our recommendations are set out in the agenda supplement from page 5. So the first one was just a request for more information. This was on saving 8, actually under adults and health, because this is a temporary accommodation spending. So this was a proposal. This is actually on page 142 of the main agenda pack. This was a targeted project to move one-bedroom households on from temporary accommodation into permanent homes, and we just requested a bit more information. More information was provided, but what I'd say is that probably what the panel was interested in part at least, was exactly how the saving related to the spending on the households, and it's still not clear to me really how that works, because we're talking about 100 households being moved on, 80k savings. We're talking about £800 per household, and the way it's set out, given the figures, the back of the envelope calculation, kind of leads me to believe that 800k per person multiplied out would make a total of 2 million for the whole of temporary accommodation, which doesn't really seem to fit with any of the figures that are provided. So I suppose a bit more information about how the saving relates to the spend. What part precisely of the spend is it that we're saving? It's clearly not the full cost of TA per household, because that's 10. I'm not sure how many households we've got entirely in TA in total, but I did do the calculation before, and the figures don't seem to add up. Right. So then the next one was what seemed to be a typographical error, 100 or 103, and that's been cleared up in the response. So I think that's fine. Next one's related to savings 7, which is also in the same page in the agenda pack. So this is a proposal to use 1-bed social housing as temporary accommodation for families with a baby or young children. The panel were very concerned about the potential for this to lead to overcrowding, given the propensity of families to grow. So we recommended that the suitability of accommodation should be reviewed annually on a family-by-family basis. The responses that we've been provided is that the current practice is every 18 months, but the panel's recommendation is on an annual basis. Next and second, also on that same saving, similarly because of worries about overcrowding, we've recommended that only families, that the use of 1-bedroom homes be limited to families with 1 child only. And it appears from the papers that the Cabinet have agreed to that, which is...
Sorry, Chair, that was badly worded. So there are 2 columns. What this reflects, the first column is the request for information that you put forward at the meeting, and the second column is the recommendation that you put to Cabinet then. So that could have been better worded.
I apologise. That's my misreading. Thank you very much for clearing that up, Philip. The Cabinet haven't yet agreed to anything. We've just recommended that the Cabinet agree to it. Okay, apologies for that. So our recommendation is that this should be limited to families with 1 child. That came through very, very strongly from panel members. The current response is the current policy is that in certain cases, families with 2 children, with some restrictions on that, would be housed in these the homes. So our recommendation is that policy be changed, basically. Okay, next one. I think that's it for the savings proposals. The next couple are to do with the HRA budget and the proposal to use London affordable rent for a portion of the new council homes that are being built. Now, we took on board the very clear position of the cabinet member that this was not something that was desirable, but was necessary in the financial climate and with the need for the house building programme to be sustainable and for the housing revenue account to balance. But really, we just wanted to make sure that this was being done in an open and transparent way. So first of all, that was just a request for information about the number of the 840 proposed homes scheduled to be allocated to the London affordable rent model hadn't received planning permission yet, and we've received an answer to that. So that's the information has been provided. Secondly, it was stated. It's been stated on numerous occasions and in the papers for this budget tonight that the London affordable rent model it's implied that it's kind of fine for most people because if you're receiving housing benefit, then because housing benefit will cover it, it will make no difference to those people. We first of all we wanted some clarity because it seems to me that this was all stated in the difference between the London affordable rent model and the cap on council formula rent that could be charged, and in actual fact, for quite a large proportion of the borough, my understanding is that we don't charge the cap, we charge a lower rent that is calculated according to the formula. And so it seemed to me that it wasn't necessarily clearly stated the difference between London affordable rent and the current formula rent. And that's been clarified in the response that the gap to average formula rent is £32.36. Rather than the gap to the cap, which is smaller at £13.73. Of course, the average formula rent, £32.36 gap, that gap will be larger in wards where the formula rent is below the average for the borough. So I think we just need to be I think what the panel were most concerned about was that we're clear about what the decision is that's being made. It then goes on to say, however, London affordable rent is significantly less than the local housing allowance rate, which means any tenant entitled to housing benefit would have their housing costs covered. The implication being there, I think, that nearly everybody who this would affect is receiving housing benefit. So then we move on to the next point, where we asked for clarity about the number of people in council and most particularly temporary accommodation, because these are the people that are going to be housed in permanently in our new build council homes who are working and not in receipt of benefits. And we have a response which is on paper, so has been circulated, that 16.8% of households in temporary accommodation don't get benefits. We can safely assume that the vast majority work. So there is a significant number of people for whom this will make a difference. And I'm not, and the panel weren't saying that we were disputing that this change in the rent model was necessary, but we were just very, very clear that we need to be open about what it is we're doing and what the effect is going to be. So the final, oh no, there's two more. Apologies. So just again on the rent levels, it was noted that in a number of different places the council talks about social rent or council rent, and it's never quite clear which form of rent we're talking about. So the recommendation was that if we're talking about formula rent, we should say formula rent. If we're talking about London affordable rent, we should say London affordable rent. And if it's vague, then it should be clear that it's not clear yet what kind of rent is being proposed. I mean, this is also relevant to planning meetings where planning applications for new council homes are coming forward stating council rent, and it's definitely been made clear in planning meetings that planning officers are under the impression that this means formula rent, but it's not quite sure that whether that's the case or not. So I think we just need to be clear about it. And finally, we just wanted to be kept informed, given that a lot of these schemes were being, had been given planning permission on the understanding from certainly members of the planning committee that formula rent was going to be used, which schemes are going to be using London affordable rent going forwards, and that we would like to receive that as a panel, as an update. So that was the end of our recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Councillor White. I'm just going to ask members who are online or around the table if they've got any questions around clarification, if there's anything they just wanted to clarify at this point. I'm just looking to see if I can see any hands up. Looking on Philip's laptop, because just in case. Councillor Bevan.
So just for clarification, so people who are working and their rent goes up by this additional amount, would it be the case that some of them would automatically, because of their income levels, then be entitled to housing benefit to help cover that increase as a new sort of customer of that service, for want of a better way of putting it?
I don't know if this is the right expertise set to ask that question, but it's my understanding that the London affordable rent will be charged on the new builds. So it won't be anybody who's moving into the new builds has a choice of where they move on to. So this won't be imposed on anybody. And as we know, even with the formula, the rent levels are vary to quite large degree across the borough and also across individual developments, depending on when people moved in and what the formula came out with at that time. So no, this won't in itself move anybody into any different set of circumstances unless they are choosing to move to one of the new builds, is my understanding.
Okay, so thank you. I think Councillor White, you went through quite clearly, and I had some questions, but I think you went through them all and they're now clear in my head where we're at. So just to be really clear for officers, everything that's on the papers, there's no real changes there. There's just that clarity that these are staying the same, and you've just emphasised your panel's position. But I didn't take from what you've said that there's any changes to anything they're in the papers already.
Just on the first one, a little bit, a request for a bit more information about how the saving relates to the spend for those families.
No, you did say that. Apologies, I missed that. Okay, thank you. So I've got John.
Chair, there'll be quite a time constrained bit of work that follows this. So the approach will be it's only really where we've got a yes in the last column that there'll be a supplementary response. But you're saying on your bits, Councillor White, that it's just that first one where yes needs to be added.
I don't think that this necessarily needs to be a response in time. It can be provided to the panel at a later date. It's absolutely fine. It doesn't need to be provided because we're not going to make another recommendation on the basis of that. We just wanted to know.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Otherwise, yeah, that just gives a time frame for officers to come back on. Okay, so thank you. So we're going to move on to children's. So Councillor Guinness, do you want to sort of introduce your report? Actually, is it children's next, or is it actually, hang on, I think I might have skipped one. I think I've skipped environment. Hang on, let me have a look. I think it's environment. Yeah, I think I got a bit carried away. Sorry, it's the Environment and Community Safety Scrutiny Panel. So over to you, Councillor Simon-Saffo. There you are.
Hello, I can't actually access the papers at the moment, unfortunately, to have a look at them. I'm finding.
Okay, so what? So can I just get from you, so when you were looking at your the recommendations, is there anything you wanted to bring to the committee? Any areas that you particularly had? I can get Philip to read out the points, and if you just sort of let us know if there's anything extra you wanted to add to those, is that okay?
That will be absolutely
so,
brilliant.
You don't have your papers. Okay, Philip, over to you.
Thanks. So for the Environment and Community Safety Scrutiny Panel, the first recommendation that was put forward related to full cost recovery of services for match day cleaning costs. This was around Spurs and a contribution to cleaning up from match days and events. So the recommendation from the panel was that they would like the council to engage with Spurs going forwards to make sure that there was a contribution from them, a fair contribution for that.
I do recall the spread one, and I believe that was there an agreement that we would actually see how much money that we will get recruit from that?
So I think that isn't what's recorded here, but that could be something you could put forward as an action to come back for finance to come back with some more information if you so wished. And obviously, as the director said, timescales are quite tight between publishing the papers for February Cabinet and now. So I don't know whether you think you'd be happy with a written response on this rather than a recommendation to Cabinet.
Yeah, I think a written response. I think that what we do want to do is ascertain how much money we're actually going to get, because I do recall there was a large mess that was left on match days, and we were using a lot of our finances to get that cleanup and the time in which it was done as well. So I do think that, yeah, written response will be fine. Thank you.
So just to be clear, Councillor Simon-Saffo, so I've got you want a cabinet response on the assurances around what the challenge is going to be back to Tottenham Hotspur, but the written response on the actual financial part of that answer. Is that correct?
Correct. You're correct, Pippa. Yes.
That's great. Thank you. We'll go on to the second one now.
Thanks. So the following recommendation was around a proposal for not recruiting to existing vacancies within the park service. So I think part of this was around a specific post related to weed maintenance or weed control, and the panel made a recommendation that they would like this saving to be reconsidered, and that the saving found from elsewhere.
Yes, that one was fine. That's fine. I recall that as well. I have nothing to add to that. Thanks.
So that was it. They were the two main recommendations put forward.
Okay, Councillor Simon-Saffo, is there anything else you wanted to add at this point? Because those are your recommendations. Are you happy with those? And if so, I'll just ask the panel if they've got any questions to put.
Yes, that's fine for now. There was another outstanding one, but I can't bring it to my mind. There was one under SEMA's portfolio, which I did want to question, but the room was so cold on the 15th, I didn't have the opportunity to actually scrutinize it that well, but I will, I don't know. Okay, so those are the two at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Bevan who wants to sort of ask a question anyway. That might jog your memory, I don't know. Councillor Bevan.
I don't think it will, because it's not really relevant, but it's just an observation that there are problems with Finsbury Park events and the Spurs events with cleaning up the surrounding areas. The council is picking up quite a lot of that bill on all those events, and it was suggested to me that Scrutiny, your panel could actually do a scrutiny review on the cleaning up of those two sites after all the events. So it's just an observation and perhaps a suggestion.
Councillor Bevan, I think that I believe that if in relation to the Spurs, I think that we want to know, have a scrutiny on that. And actually we can add to that the parks as well, because when they have large events, we are actually supposed to generate income from those large events. However, we are at a financial deficit because some of the money will have to go back in to the unprecedented cleaning up of the events afterwards. So I would say, yes, we can do something like that. I would, that's one of my recommendations, yes. Thank you, Councillor Bevan.
Okay, I haven't got any further questions on that, on your panel's recommendations. So thank you so much for presenting those. We'll go on to Children and Young People's panel. Councillor Guinness, would you like to just go through yours and let us know if there's any updates you want to make?
Thanks, Chair. I suppose, yeah, Children and Young People's panel came up with 3 recommendations and requesting responses from cabinet members. This has been like a concern for the committee for the last 2 years. Panel members were under the impression that basically the consultation process, especially with residents and stakeholders, is not easily kind of, like not many people can access that, or it's accessible and people can feed back into the process. So maybe a easy read kind of version for the residents, or something that, because obviously important decisions are being made about, you know, the borough's future. Consultation with residents and stakeholders, and on specifically like medium-term financial strategy, or the, you know, annual budget setting, when we are consulting the residents and the stakeholders, that we make it as easy to digest as possible, in order to encourage residents to participate and feed back into the process. So the second recommendation from the panel was basically the importance of rigorous monitoring and reviewing of external risk and measures to mitigate it, so that any changes can be responded to in a timely manner. Yeah, I suppose the context in which this kind of came out was very, in particular, like at the time we were discussing the budget, the proposed budget for the Children and Young People's Department, we didn't know about the outcome of the safety valve program, and what exactly we were given kind of assurances that things are progressing in the right direction, but we don't know whether it's going to be a successful, like that funding is going to be granted or not. So I suppose the idea was then to recommend that particular budgetary impact of, to also, sorry, in relation to the first recommendation, was also that the budgetary impacts of the safety valve program to be closely monitored, sorry, and request that this be included on regular quarterly financial updates to the overview and scrutiny committee. Presumably we meant like, I'm not sure about the last bits, overview and scrutiny, maybe to Children and Young People's Scrutiny panel, or yes, like regular updates, because the some members especially our co-opted members who are school governors, raised some concern around the impact of that on school, like in order school to participate with the, like they might have like be imposed some services that they don't have the capacity to deliver. So it was around that. Lastly, the panel recommends that in future years, the equalities and impact of specific proposal on MTFS be outlined more clearly in order to provide members with a clear understanding of them. I suppose this was like, again, for the panel members to have a better understanding, like what do we have each of the proposed saving, and has it been properly kind of impact assessed, and where do we get the information? So it will make probably the work job of the committee members easier if they knew that information in advance, that it's those proposals have been impact assessed and there aren't many concerns, or there are, or yeah. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Is there any questions to Councillor Gunness on the recommendations that she's put forward? No. Okay, I'm seeing nothing. Oh, Josephine.
Sorry, can we just confirm what Councillor said in regards to the second recommendation, that it's the request for regular quarterly finance updates to the Children's and Young People's panel, not the Overview and Scrutiny Committee? I think that's what you said. So we probably need a change and update on that one. Thanks.
Basically, the recommendation, it says to go to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I was just thinking if this is a typo, like a sort of the relevant committee to receive that information and have a discussion about that. This information is actually Children and Young People, as Josephine pointed out. Not Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. It's an easy mistake to make. We're on all the committees, so yes, absolutely, that can go to Children's. Okay, so I'm happy with those. Take those forward, and we'll move on. So we've got the Adults and Health Scrutiny Panel, the priority one. So we had the new revenue savings proposals. So these were number 1 to number 5. It was noted that I think it was in number 1 and number 5 were the biggest saving proposals on this, and I think there was concern from panel members that there were just a bulk of the new revenue savings were based on 2 proposals. I think the first one, which was the improved process and practices to ensure that residents receive the right level of care. That was a proposed saving of £2.2 million. And the one at the end was improving commissioning and efficiencies following the success of implementation of the safety valve programme. The adults and health communities are undertaking the safety valve programme themselves, which will utilise the approach and methodologies to deliver improved commissioning arrangements and efficiencies, and that had a £4 million saving attachment to it. So out of the total of £7.7 million savings, these pretty much were, for £6.2 million of that. So it was quite a substantive part. The risk obviously in that is if either of those 2 are not made or not made in total, then that was the risk to the savings on that. And I think also there was that's not particularly clear on this, apologies, that around the first savings with improved process and practices to ensure the residents receive the right level of care. I think again, there's always a concern from the panel when reviewing care packages that that the residents still receive the care that they require. And I think there's always a concern from members when anything around care packages comes up, that we are really, really clear as a council that we obviously are protecting the residents' right to the right package of care. Now, I know that's probably goes without saying, but I think we just wanted to note that that's, you know, members felt quite strongly on that. And I'm sure all members feel very strongly on that, to be honest. And I think so that's one area we would particularly be interested in sort of seeing in more depth as that saving proposal goes through. And I think on the quarterly updates that we get as a panel, I think that's one area that we would be particularly focusing in on. The second one was the winter discharge funding. Now, this was around, this was a conversation that we'd had in relation to funding with the ICB. So this is a slightly off-piste, but really it's just an understanding from the financial, our joint working with our partners, especially in health, and really it's an understanding around the budget that comes alongside. So how much money that we put in as the council and how much money health comes in, and this was particularly about the winter funding. There's a table at the bottom, so that gives the further information. So that was just for us to note as a panel. The new revenue growth proposals, the acuity complexity in adult social care clients. So I think the proposal relates to an extra £2 million of funding over and above the 2.8 million, which was obviously really welcomed. But however, it was noted this was an ongoing risk to the budget in the medium and long term, and requested further information, which showed that a further 3.1 million had already been allocated to the 2024 and 25 adult social care budget. And I think this just highlights the pressure that's already been raised today around the adult social care or any of the care budgets, and around the potential in anticipated growth that has already been put in. So we acknowledge the current challenges in the financial circumstances for the adult social care, and the reassurance from the Cabinet that further anticipated increases in demand had been adequately factored in going forward, not just obviously the 2024-25, but that's obviously being built in. So that was a request from the recommendation. And then the next one was inflationary pressure. Again, that's the proposal related to an additional £4 million of funding to meet additional costs to adult social care purchasing budgets resulting from increased costs to providers. And the panel heard that an expected inflation rate of 5% being used to calculate the additional funds. So I think the concern obviously from the panel was that we were potentially looking at higher rates. The Office for Budget Responsibility had recently predicted the inflation rate for 2023 to be 7.4%, and I think we were concerned about the risk in the budget shortfall should the actual rate of inflation prove to be higher than 5%. So I understand that probably information will be more applicable once we come to the February, additional information in the February funding that's going to be announced to us. And then we have additional funding, and then details provided on additional funding being allocated. So that just told us what that response was. That was fine. And the draft capital programme, aids and adaptations. So it's further detailed. That's actually coming to the panel. So that's not a request to Cabinet. That's a response that's going to be coming back to Cabinet around the grant funding for aids and adaptation. Osborne Grove, the panel discussed the inflationary pressures, and that also is going to be coming back to the panel. That's not going to come back to Cabinet. And then the estimated minimum revenue provision. The panel queried whether the capital expenditure was sustainable at the project levels given the costs around the rising interest rates. Yes, rise in estimated MPR from 13.3 million in 2022-23 to 37.9 million by 27-28. We had a response to that. And I think what John's already said about taking on board each capital spend and looking at it before any decisions are taken. So as the Cabinet, I suppose, has responded to, well, no, John's responded to that already. I don't know if that's, I'm not sure that was going to make any difference if that goes to Cabinet, because I think the response is probably, John, I'm looking at you here, is there going to be a significantly different response if we wait until February? And for anything further detail on that?
No, I think that the response that you've got there is the only response really to be given at this time.
Thank you. And then we've got council tax, and then there's a question that I asked earlier, estimate to be provided. So 1% increase in council tax, 1.2 million. Apologies, I'd already forgotten that I'd got that in there. So 1.2 million, that was very, very good. It's pretty much spot on. So that was just for information. So that's not to Cabinet. And then future reports on the budget, MTFS to scrutiny panels. So this bit was about bullet points, but actually it was a slightly larger recommendation. That the bullet point part was in around the additional information that the panel was looking for around joined up budgets between adults and health. So what we're not getting at the moment is really an indication of how much money is coming through from our health partners into our budgets. So we understand what the council's spending and the risks of the council, but we're not understanding the health side. So really it was about the future reports, the budget to our panel was around getting that further information. But in terms of the scrutiny panels as a whole, we had some feedback from various people to the panel around what would make it easier to read the papers, and John will smile because I think we bring this up every year. But it's, I think, again, what we really liked was the sort of the packs for the panel. What would be really helpful, though, I know you have the reports pack as a whole, which we obviously want because that puts it in a whole. But then for each of the panels, so for children's, if the sections on children specifically could be put forward as like a covering report from that, so that councillors can in the children's or lay members can look at it and go straight away, okay, these are the areas from the main pack. You've got the main pack to reference it, so you can put it into context, but it then would just really help to have that as part of the actual recommendations in a much smaller pack that would be sort of looked at by the panel, with the main pack used as an appendices, as in so that the panel can look at that and sort of make sure that it's looking at it as the whole, so the members can read it all. But for members of the public in particular, it would be quite a succinct pack that would be hopefully more accessible to members of the public. So I'm going to look around at my colleagues and see if they've got any thoughts or ideas on that. John, Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, just to say that, because I phoned up Pippa and said this budget pack is huge and there's a lot of new people on scrutiny, and it included the whole complete financial report for the whole council budget, which really should have been an appendices. So each scrutiny committee should have had the pages that it was supposed to look at in the pack, which would have been 4, 5, 6, 7 pages probably. And the whole council budget, which was also in the pack, should be an appendix at the back, because that would make it much easier for the panel members. They look at it. This is what we've got to scrutinise. This is the bit of the service that we're responsible for. And as I say, I looked at it and I thought, because being quite a new chair as well, this is quite a paper-driven operation, all this scrutiny. So I picked that up, and and Pippa said to me, well, I've raised it before, so if next year we could have it done that way. Is it clear what I've said? Do you understand the point? What I'm seeking?
Yes, I think I do, and Councillor Connors made similar points. So what I need to do with colleagues is just look to see what we are providing and see how we can move closer to what you're after, because we have sought to listen in previous years and try and pull out bits, and there is a degree of inevitability that you know, the corporate document is an important reference document for everyone, because it is one big whole after all. But we will have a look at it again and see if we can help more in it. Yeah, we'll do what we can.
I think always the problem with the presentation is you want to be as clear and concise as possible, so it's easy to understand and see the whole picture. But then the questions that are asked actually demand all the detail, so you end up having provided all. By the time you add all the detail to the questions, you might as well have provided the whole document in the first place. But I get the point about the whole document could be secondary to the headline information.
And I think Councillor Williams, you're right, but I think especially for new members, when they first they're looking through the whole pack, and then it's the cabinet pack as well, and then they're trying to pick out just children's out of those two big packs. I think it was a bit daunting, and especially for members of the public who aren't quite as au fait as maybe we are with the agenda packs. It's just, but definitely to have the main pack, as you said, to have it as an appendices with the understanding that members will read it as a whole, but then when it comes to the scrutiny of in their panels, they can focus in a little bit more, and hopefully that'll make it clearer for people to know where they're picking up. Councillor White, did you have?
Just to generally agree with you, Chair. It's just I just think it could be done quite simply, maybe with just a few extra pages in there that are just like, right, this is the start of the bit that's relevant to your panel and your panel alone. You know, this is the cabinet report, the kind of the overall picture, and it kind of does do that already in the first page says, you know, Appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C. However, when you actually get into the pack, where it takes a little bit of, in my view, it takes a bit of knowing your way around it already to figure out where one appendix ends and the next appendix starts. And it would just be helpful just to have a little bit more hand holding there, I think.
Message received. We'll see what we can do.
No, that's thank you. We always ask for more, don't we? You give us a little bit, we ask for that next. So thank you. I've got Councillor Simmons-Sappho who with a hand up.
I was just echoing what everybody had already said, really. It's just to have a summary document that we are able to read succinctly and give feedback to, because that's one of the tools of engagement. If you don't do that, then it becomes an onerous task, and then we're trying to decipher what is ours, what isn't ours, what we can give full scrutiny to. So yeah, I'm just echoing what everybody else says, and I'd really appreciate it if we had it sooner rather than later.
Right, well, thank you very much for that. And I think with that, has anyone got any questions? Sorry, on the adults and health, I sort of went straight from that to PACS.
To clarify, the winter discharge funding, that was a request for the 22-23, just so we're just kind of clear. Thanks.
Thank you, and we've had that information. Thank you. Lords, and I'll just check if Vanessa's still got her hand up, but Lords first.
Right, okay.
Maybe it's not appropriate for tonight, but with regards to Osborne Grove, I've been part of the original co-design group, and we had a very difficult meeting last week with residents, and it'd be really good for those of us that are in the group and the officers that have worked so hard for us to have a breakdown of the financial positives of this project if it goes ahead. And it'd be really, really good. I mean, maybe it's not appropriate for tonight, but it'd be really good if finance could actually take that on board, because I think then we could show, that'd be another piece of evidence that we could give to residents. And I'm talking about people who are currently outside of the borough being brought back in once we have such a project. But it'd be really good if there was some detailed financial positive implications of that project so that we can actually use it, because we're hoping to meet with the residents. At the moment, they're undecided about whether they want to meet with us, but hopefully if we've got this type of information, it might be a real positive for us.
Okay, thank you, Lords. I mean, we had in the recommendation, it was agreed that a more detailed update report would be brought to a meeting of the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee in 2023, and it's been added to the panel's work programme. So were you asking that you got more information for the cabinet? So the cabinet going to the cabinet to get that financial information, so February, March time, or are you happy that it comes back later?
I think we need it as soon as possible because, you know, we need to actually sort of try and encourage the residents to think positively about this project. We need to be doing it within the next few weeks.
Okay, then that's been taken. So I've looked to my panel members. They're happy that we take it then to response to cabinet, so we get the financial information as part of the cabinet response. Is that okay? So it will come through in more quickly.
That would be great, because I think that if we, at the moment, they're very hesitant about the project in the, you know, and there's some very assertive people. So any information that we can give them, it will be sort of just to prove what the value of this intended project can do for the community and for the borough. But it would be really good if we have that information about the financial implications and how positive it could be for the borough.
Okay, thank you, Lords. We've heard your request and it's been now added to the recommendation. So thank you very much. And yeah, we hope to get that information out to you with the cabinet. Well, we will be getting that information out with the cabinet response. So thank you, Lords. I'm going to just check with Vanessa if you had a question. No, sorry, apologies. I must have missed.
No, that's fine.
Okay,
I did,
lovely.
but I think it's been answered.
Oh, has it? Okay, excellent. All right. I'm not seeing any of the hands go up. So I'm going to close down the adults and health section and we're going to go on to the culture, strategy and engagement. Now, we only had this meeting a week ago, so hopefully this will be very it'll all be in the members' minds. We did ask for clarification on a number of areas. So I'm just going to quickly go through those and we'll make any recommendations tonight. So that's page 27. There's the new revenue savings proposals. It's on the additional commercial advertising opportunities. So we had the definition of carbon purifying technology, which we've had the response to. Is everyone happy with that? Councillor White? Okay, so that response has been noted and there's no further action on that. Additional commercial advertising opportunity. This was around the vehicle fleet. Given the high profile, there were some concerns around adding on advertising alongside a council vehicle. So the committee asked if we could have an understanding of how much money this proposal was, or this part of this proposal was going to be bringing in. So I'm going to look to my finance colleagues to see if we've got any breakdown available for tonight.
You're referring to
CSE SAV 002.
Right. I thought it was asking how realistic they were and about the policy issues. Rather, I don't think we've got any numbers tonight. But just to clarify, what the nature of the question is. I mean, there are some estimates presented in the budget, aren't there, for what we're going to generate? So, is it more just about the level of assurance for the degree of confidence and some commentary on how that oversight is going to be exercised?
I think the proposal encompassed a number of
yes, it does.
So we were just particularly interested in advertising on vehicles that could be recognised as Haringey Council vehicles, not all the other parts to it. So it required just that bit to be pulled out. from. But we were waiting for that information tonight because I have to say there was some split in sort of opinion on whether this was a recommendation that people wanted to put forward around not doing the advertising on fleet vehicles that could be identified as Haringey Council. So I'm assuming we haven't got that financial information. So Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so Veolia advertised on the side of their vehicles, recycling, things like that. And I know in the recent past, Homes for Haringey advertised, have you got any temporary accommodation that Haringey Council could use on their vans? That's not a problem. What we wanted to know was the financial contribution that advertisers other than council services would produce if this happened, because we think these vans are really high profile in Haringey, and some of us, not all of us, were concerned that if it was Greg's advertising or whoever, we had a problem. So we wanted to know what the revenue would be produced by this type of advertising, and that's the figure that we haven't got.
Chair, I'm playing a degree of catch up on this. Philip has just given me sight of some of the questions and the responses that you've had, which are probably in addition to the ones which are included in the document, Philip. And there is an officer response provided to this particular question about the approach taken with external advertisers in similar situations at the moment, which looks to deal, I think, with the policy concerns. So I don't know if that's adequate for your purposes or what else it is that you particularly need. Thank you.
I think it was whether it was a specifically high. So I think the concern was because the current financial situation, members obviously don't want to turn down or push back on something that can be income generating. But if it was only like a couple of £100, I'm obviously being facetious here, but if it's only a small amount, would it then that amount be worth advertising with maybe a company that members may feel might not have been the best match with Haringey Council? I'm hoping I'm trying to.
Yes, I think I understand exactly the concerns and the questions. I just don't think we've got the answers right here, right now. So I think if that's okay, we'll get back to you on that.
Okay, so in this.
Just to clarify, I think what you're saying is that the part that you would like to know was a breakdown of how much income was expected.
Yeah. Because we haven't got that information, are members happy to? How quickly would we be able to get this information? I think it's probably the easiest.
Sorry, Chair. I think probably tomorrow I can try and contact them. They obviously perhaps misinterpreted the actual request.
Well, should we take this then by email? Because without the financial information, I think we're still in the same position that we were last week. So unless we can either do it so that we make a decision now without the financial information, or we can then do it as a whole. We just literally get the information and put it out, and everyone can put their opinions forward as to what the recommendation, and then we would then make the recommendation based on what the panel decides. It's unusual, but I'm just not quite sure if you want to move forward, because we just haven't got any further information. It's up to you. So I'm going to start with Councillor Guinness, and we'll just literally go around everybody and ask.
Or I was going to suggest we take that part out of it, like basically just pause it for this year. But obviously the panel, we went against the idea of generating, we know council uses billboards and like rents out stuff to generate income, which is all welcome, and we're supporting that. But the use of council vehicles, especially like Homes for Haringey, and it felt like maybe we could, what I'm trying to suggest is we will approve that recommendation subject to that particular paragraph referring to vehicles is taken out of that paragraph. That's my
I
suggestion.
hear what you're saying. So that's Councillor Guinness, Councillor White, and then I'll take Councillor Bevan and Councillor Simmons-Saffo.
Yeah, I mean, I was clear last week that I I wasn't going to be happy if we said we weren't going to, we were going to ask for this to be changed, because even if we're not comfortable with advertising being used, we do need to maximise our revenue. So I think, what we said previously about, having some, and there's been a response in terms of what the policy is, and there is a policy in place. As long as we have a policy to make sure that the firms that are advertising are appropriate, I would like to say yes, fine to this. What I would say is, seeing that people have asked for some information, I think we should agree this by email, and we shouldn't make a decision now. We should agree it by email.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, I agree by email.
Councillor Simmons-Saffo.
I agree by email, but because I want to know how much they're actually generating. If it's millions of pounds, then maybe I need to reconsider. But I don't know. I just have a thing, but affiliating yourself to us, you has to go through absolute scrutiny, because it can be reputationally damaging for us. So if it's generating loads and loads of money, then fair enough. But if not, I think that, we can have other options.
Okay, thank you. I've got John, and then I'll just check with the co-optees at the end. Sorry, for John.
Thanks. I'm grateful for Philip, who's just referencing back to the MTFS report and the details provided in that, which is in page 221 of your major pack for this saving, the additional commercial advertising opportunities, and in the narrative there, it's got some details about how we think that might come back. Most particularly on fleet advertising, there's a number of councils have advertised sites of their vehicles. We have been approached by a provider and could deliver income at approximately £30,000 per annum. So if you wanted what component part of the major figure relates to fleet advertising, it looks like it's 30k.
Okay, that's very clear. So thank you, John. So we've got a figure now to attach to that. So it's £30,000 a year potentially by a provider. So I'm just going to go back round and also take in obviously the co-optees if you'd like to. You don't have to put comment at this point, obviously, but I'll just take Councillor Guinness and then we'll go around. So bearing in mind the money is £30,000 per year. Does that make any difference?
I think it's not a huge amount, and at this stage, and also like now the question of what kind of advertisement would it be on the vehicles, and
I think you've got a policy that says, sorry, does someone want to just remind us what the policy says on the on this? Is there some this actual response? Wasn't there a response? Yeah. Do you want to just? Is there anything specific? Okay, well, waiting for that, Councillor White.
I mean, so if I just read quickly this part of the response that says, we have an advertising policy which also ensures that the council are able to refuse advertising where this is appropriate. So there is already a policy position on this, and the council has the ability to say no. We ensure before working with any organisation that we undertake appropriate due diligence. This includes confirming, for instance, that they're fully up to date with regards to business rates and regulatory requirements.
Councillor White.
sorry,
Just going around again because we now know the amount of money that is, and obviously we've had the policy read out.
yeah, okay, sorry. I suppose I would agree that it doesn't seem very much, and I suppose my main question would be, how does that relate to what the advertisers are paying? So what the provider is a kind of middleman kind of, so we're getting money to provide space. There are advertisers placing their adverts. Who's getting the bulk of the cash?
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I think it might just be worth saying that on this item, there are a large number of items which I think the budget is proposing that we give officers the opportunity to really investigate and see where they think there could be some generation of income, but none of those in themselves would happen without that decision being scrutinised in the first place. If you see at the very beginning of the, it says, where is it? Where is it? Where's the bit you just read out? Yes, yeah, there is a basket of advertising opportunities is what they're saying. So it's not actually, it's sort of to give the go ahead to scope out those opportunities. I think these are potential income generations and they'd certainly be looked at more closely before anything was agreed to. So whether it's needed that you look at each one in such detail, I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Bevan and then Councillor Simon-Saffo.
So it looks as if some of that 30,000 is going to come from other advertising, which means to me it's completely a nonsensical waste of time to be fiddling about with adverts on our vans, which should be driving about Haringey immaculately clean, which some of them are not, so that everyone sees Haringey in operation around the borough. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Bevan. I've got Councillor Simon-Saffo.
I believe £30,000 is a drop in the ocean. I cannot see the logic of allowing, and they will probably get so much more from the advert than they actually putting in £30,000. I don't know which organisations it is, but I think that, you know, unless they're offering a lot more, I don't see why we should continue with this. That's my honest opinion.
Okay, so am I hearing then that a recommendation from the OSC to Cabinet is that that line in that proposal is removed, that we would like the bit about advertising on fleet vehicles that are obviously identifiable as Haringey Council vehicles by members of the public, that line to be removed? I'll just get a show of hands if people are happy with that. 1, 2. So Councillor White not happy. I'm a bit ambivalent, I have to say. I haven't particularly got a strong view on this one way or another. But even so, it would be a majority. So, Councillor White, are you happy to take the majority? It's a majority vote. Okay, so we'll take that out. Oh, that'll be the recommendation that we make to Cabinet to remove that. Obviously, this isn't our decision, but it's just our recommendation to Cabinet. Okay, so thank you. That's the recommendation going forward through from overview and scrutiny. We've got the draft capital programme. We've just to quickly go through 330 and 464 on the Civic Centre and Bruce Castle. These were two that were picked out specifically because they had the highest, the largest amount of money attached to them as part of the draft capital programme. We wanted extra reassurance on the impact on the revenue budget from the borrowing costs. John, would you like to speak to this?
Sorry, there were some questions tabled, weren't they? Yeah, yeah. The answers tabled.
Is the answer on?
Yes, John provided a response.
Not to this question, I don't think.
Francis, would you like to read out the? I think you're there, and then John can add.
That's a different question. Oh, right. Right, okay. Chair, I have got it. It's just the printed version I've got here didn't mention Civic Centre or Bruce Castle by name, so that threw me temporarily. If I can just quote the answer then that has been provided. Both of the schemes are included in the capital programme as self-financing. This means that a business case following the 5 business case model process, which is a standard model for public sector investments, that's a technical descriptor of how we do the business case work, would need to be prepared before any significant investment is undertaken. The business case would need to prove that the expenditure would generate sufficient income and or savings to pay for the capital financing charges. If the schemes were to proceed, then there would be adjustments in the council's budgets to reflect the savings or income generated by the investment, which would offset the treasury costs of that investment. So that narrative applies to the Civic Centre Works Bruce Castle, but would apply equally to any of the other self-financing schemes that we've got in the budget. Thank you.
Right, I'll take any questions from members on the panel around the answer around it being self-financing. No, is everyone happy with the information that they've been given? No further recommendations to make on those. Okay, right, so there's no further recommendations to Cabinet, and thank you for the extra information. General issues, there's updated budget figures. I think that was the request which you've come back to today, and that, I have to say, is the final part of the report. So I've got no further recommendations to make from overview and scrutiny. So we've gone through the panel's recommendations today. We've done one change on the cultural, I still can't remember the whole name, cultural strategy and engagement side. That's a new recommendation that's been made. And there's some points from Osborne Grove, which is now going to be put through as a cabinet request. And there's one other one that I was going to say. Oh yes, and the information that was going to be coming as the packs to each of the panels that we've had that as recommendations made. So we've got the general recommendations or the general recommendations on that. That's as far as I'm concerned. Has anyone got any further recommendations they wanted to put forward that I've missed that you think I should have picked up? Dominic, Yvonne.
I don't want to give you any recommendations. I just want to say to you, before you go ahead with this advertising on the vans, you need to speak to people who were in the advertising, because when Chris Liffin was here, when he first started, that's what they did in the council. They actually put advertising, and it ran for quite a while, but then in the end they had to scrap it because there were so many complaints from residents as well because of the antics that some of them were getting up to. So I just thought you'd like to know.
Thank you, Yvonne. Just sorry to be really clear. So the recommendation from the panel tonight was that the line around advertising on Haringey vehicles, the fleet, wasn't going to be recommended from the panel. But obviously, as I said, it's not our decision. It's just our recommendation. So just so you know, but I think your comment was probably to Cabinet, wasn't it? Instead. But thank you very much for that. So that concludes the recommendations from scrutiny. So that part is concluded, and we've just got the Cabinet member questions to go with Councillor Williams. So thank you.
Okay, so I'll share this part of the meeting then. So anyone, any further questions for Councillor Williams? I've got one question. Have we decided yet as regards to the level of the council tax that we are going to apply, or is that still under consideration? Or
That's still under consideration. Yeah.
you have a question?
Yes, I had a question. So, Sarah, one part of your portfolio is participatory budgeting. And I'm just wondering if you could say a few words about how you see that, because the budget that we're doing this year is broadly following the same model that we've used previously. Obviously, there has to be a level of confidentiality about the earlier stages of the budget process, but participatory budgeting is supposed to be involvement of, you know, ordinary people in making the budget, and I would have assumed that it would have more involvement in the earlier stages than is currently the case when we basically you know, we go through the scrutiny process at the same time that a draft budget goes out to consultation, and I would have thought that participatory budgeting would involve people who aren't in the privileged position of being councillors at an earlier stage. So could you just say a few words about what that part of your portfolio is, really?
So participatory budgeting, it's a really good question, Matt, is and can be many different things. So some organisations, you've probably seen this, would consider that members of the public or the customers of the organisation would decide between different priority areas by, for example, on leaving a supermarket, putting a token in the area that they think is most important for the charitable giving of the supermarket, for example. That could be badged as participatory budgeting. Some councils badge the budget, and it's this thing I've mentioned before, the difference between what's a consultation and what's engagement, because we actually call our budget consultation a consultation when it's not statutory. The only statutory part of it is when we consult with businesses. So I think it would be better if we could decouple those words, but that is it as it stands. So just consulting the public in the way we do is badged as participatory budgeting by some authorities. Another area that is called participatory budgeting in other authorities is where SIL money or Section 106 money is how that's spent locally to a new development. So there's lots of different ideas of what participatory budgeting is or can be. And my take is that we try and budget, and all our financial dealings do involve participation of all residents. So I think residents, in my view is that, although I have to say our consultation has had quite a lot of footfall through the website, I think we're getting some information on exactly how many numbers tomorrow, but since it was launched, we were quite pleased with how many people had been going on and engaging with that. I think another meaningful strand to participatory budgeting is through how local groups can spend very local pots of money, and how deciding and how that's a thread that I'm trying to get moving. We've had early discussions around, I don't know if you know about the carbon fund, that's actually been allocated through groups bidding to that. That could be an example of participatory budgeting, and that's the sort of example I'm more interested in. So that is where people actually can change where they live and the services where they live through positive engagement around and having that funded to some degree by the council. I don't know if that answers your question fully, but that's.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I suppose what I'm asking is, I suppose what we're not planning on is next year having residents who aren't councillors having briefings on the different service areas with the officers at an earlier stage prior to the setting of the draft budget in November or December. That's not what's envisaged.
I haven't envisaged that. I mean, I'm not ruling anything out. I mean, and you know, discussions can happen. I would say it is terribly difficult as it's first year I've been obviously cabinet member and doing this, but it's so fast. The information is so late from government, so I don't know how meaningful that could be. I mean, even this scrutiny process is really quite rushed, isn't it? The timescales are very tight, so I don't know how much meaningful engagement we could get, but it's definitely not something I would say we can't do for sure. Pippa?
So thank you, Chair. So I just want to clarify, I'm not really sure, do you have any influence around business rates? Because, right, you don't, so I shan't ask you a question about that, then that's a shame, because I had that coming at me today from businesses who are not happy with their business rates. Okay, so that's not you. So the other question then that I've got around is that actually probably more from a political perspective then around rather than from the Treasury. It was the question that I think we were posing earlier with Tim around Treasury management. And I think it's just around this amount of new borrowing. And I think because it sort of says it on that table at 3.1 that there's going to be 1.8 billion pounds of new borrowing by 2028. I mean, it's just really from your perspective as a member, as a cabinet member, how confident or you know, it's just the climate that this isn't all happening in. It just seems in these next 5 years, there's a level of uncertainty that we genuinely didn't have. I mean, we had COVID, but before that, there was that, you know, calm, and the interest rates were so much lower. So it's just really from your perspective as a cabinet member, around the finances of the council as a whole, around that level of new borrowing and the pressure then on the general revenue budget. You know, I think for us it just makes, you know, seeing those figures, they're so big. Well, compared to what we were on at 500 or 700 million, I know that's still a lot, but you know, as the figures go into the billions, then you start to sort of feel a little bit more anxious. So I think really it's just from your perspective really as to how confident you think that this is the right 5 years to be borrowing in such, you know, these large amounts.
That's a bit of a big question. I mean, I think we've had the assurance that everything, you know, will have to have a very robust business plan. There'll be no borrowing that was reckless. And so in that sense, although nothing is ever risk-free, by having continuous remodelling as things change as well, it should ensure that we're as risk-free as we can be. And clearly the corporate committee has a role in holding our feet to the fire on that all the time. From a political point of view, I would say in these times now, we're getting on for 13 years of this austerity, which, you know, has not delivered a better financial situation for the country. We're now up to a couple of trillion, I think, debt nationally. I mean, no, we only reached 1 trillion not very long ago, and I think we're up to 2. Is that right? Could be wrong. I think that's right. So I think I think in times of austerity, my political view is the capital is where we can do things. We can invest, we can get people living in decent homes, we can provide better parks and facilities. It's the area that we have a little bit more scope to do some of the things that we want to do. I mean, not all of them, but as I say, as long as we have the assurance from the professionals and those authorities that have come unstuck quite catastrophically, they haven't had that assurance, robust assurance that we're having, you know, and that we put ourselves under, and the officers do.
I mean, this is almost the converse of the question I just asked. So the bit that I was actually thinking about, sorry, it's always the way just you're going to ask a question.
Pippa, did you want to come in? Pippa? Lords, sorry, Lords.
Lords, do you want to come in?
Yeah. I was wondering whether the local authority had considered or given any attention to the impact on the local authority of the deficits that schools on the east of the borough are facing, as well as sort of, you know, some of the decisions that are now being made about having to make teachers or TAs redundant. Has any consideration been given to, I mean, schools, like I've had several meetings this week, schools are aware of the implications, but has any thinking been done on the part of the local authority as to the financial implications of this scenario?
I'll hand over to John if necessary, but of course, I mean, I think that subject of schools facing deficits has come up in at least one meeting I've had today and one yesterday. So it is definitely the forefront of everyone's minds, what is happening in schools at the moment, for sure. That doesn't mean I have loads of answers, but we are aware of it.
Pippa, did you want to come back?
Apologies there. I mean, speaking too much. So the last question that I had really was actually the other way around. So if on the capital spend, if there are things that we can't do because of rising interest rates, or there's that robust challenge, as you've said, the risk then obviously is then, because those will be put in place not only to help our residents, but also potentially to make some savings or to provide services in Haringey rather than outsource them to in other areas. So are you thinking that there's a risk if we don't do these capital projects within certain areas? Are you saying, well, there's actually then a risk that we then are spending even more anyway, but in the revenue side, because we haven't got that capital building to help us in that?
I would say that's exactly what we're saying. Yeah. And obviously things like safety valve, that is about investing in order to save. And similar things are happening across different directorates. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? No? Okay. Right. Well, I thank you all for the meeting. I thank you, Vanessa, for your first meeting. This is probably one of the driest meetings, so you probably started off with the driest meeting, so I hope you don't get discouraged. So we have got a meeting next Tuesday at Alexandra House. It's a training meeting. It's an in-person meeting. There will be refreshments. I'll ask Richard to send out a reminder email. The cabinet are going to be there as well, because it's sort of training for everybody sort of thing. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you, officers, as well.
Thank you.